and Pharisees who manifestly failed to practice what they preached. Practice what you preach. Remember as a kid, being told to practice what I preached by my mom. These Pharisees may have been leaders of the Jewish community because they sat in Moses' seat, but they were not good leaders. They were not good leaders. Their piety was for show. And they put heavy burdens on men's shoulders, but without being willing to even lift a finger to help them carry those burdens. And so Jesus called them hypocrites. In the Greek language, hypocrite means literally actors, stage actor. Jesus called them stage actors. The problem was that these scribes and Pharisees forgot that their main job as leader was. And their main job as leader was to serve the needs of the people they were in charge of. We see this same problem all the time in the world around us, don't we? Whether it's in religion, or in business, or in politics, or in any other field, there are too many out there, too many leaders who are in it for themselves. They put their own agenda ahead of what others want or need, and they often end up enacting policies that hurt the people they're supposed to serve. They do good deeds solely to impress others and enhance their own image. And they lust for power and recognition. That's what drives them. They are bad leaders. And it seems to be an issue that humanity has dealt with from the beginning, continues to deal with, and perhaps always will deal with. People that are leaders for the wrong reasons. In contrast, Jesus held up a radically different leadership model. He said, "He who is greatest among you shall be your servant." Jesus showed us what good leadership looks like. It's servant leadership. Servant leadership. Leading by example. His public ministry was characterized by healing, by teaching, and by self-sacrifice. And it took him to the cross and the tomb, where suffering death and resurrection he became the new leader, the good shepherd, who gave his life for his sheep. He said, elsewhere in the gospel, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And that's what he did. And that's the model of leadership that he set forever for the church. Not just for the leaders in the church, not just for the priests and the bishops, but for all of us as Christians, as disciples, to be servant leaders. Servant leadership is at the heart of Christian discipleship. St. Augustine summed it up well when he said, "We are leaders and servants, and we lead when we serve." And throughout the history of the church, the best and the greatest princes of the church were those who led by example. Now, on November 3rd, just 2 days ago, the saint of the day was a great example of Catholic servant leadership. It was St. Martin de Porres. St. Martin was born in Lima, Peru in 1579. He was the illegitimate son of a Spanish aristocrat with a freed slave of mixed African and Native American descent, his mother. And not long after Martin was born, the aristocrat, his name was Juan de Porres, abandoned the family and basically ditched them and left them on their own. And Martin's mother survived and took care of him by taking in laundry. And so Martin grew up in poverty. When he was 12, his mother apprenticed him to a barber surgeon. A barber-surgeon. And Martin learned how to cut hair and to draw blood. Hopefully, not at the same time. He also learned how to care for wounds and to prepare and administer medicines. It's interesting, but it's also a little frightening to me that in those days, barber and nurse was one job. It was one trade. But what's interesting is that both his mother's laundry and this trade that he went into as barber surgeon prepared Martin for his future. And after a few years working this trade, Martin applied to the Dominicans to be a lay helper. The problem was that because he was mixed race and he was born out of wedlock, he was ineligible to become a Dominican brother. So he refused to be daunted and he volunteered instead. He just simply showed up to help. And guess what he did? He did laundry. He served in the kitchen. And he served as a nurse. I don't know about the barber part. After 9 years, though, his diligence, his positive attitude, his charity, and his humility were such as to cause his superiors in the Dominican order to reconsider and to throw out the eligibility requirements, and they made him a full brother. And then as a religious brother, Martin got busy. His nights were spent in prayer, and his days were filled with nursing the sick and caring for the poor. He ministered to anyone who needed him. He left the monastery to go out to minister. He was also an effective fundraiser. He begged for alms. He would go out, beg for alms, take the money, and serve poor people on the street corners. He also raised money for dowries. In those days, the only way that a young poor girl could get out of poverty was to marry or to enter a convent. And it was a catch-22 because if they're poor, and they had to pay a dowry. And if it's a catch-22, because how could they pay a dowry if they were poor? They couldn't, so they were stuck. And so Martin went out and he raised money for dowries. He also partnered up with St. Rose of Lima, and worked and had a tremendous ministry to young women raising dowries. When Martin de Porres was canonized in 1962 by Pope John XXIII, this is what the Pope said in his canonization homily. This is from the Liturgy of the Hours, November 3rd. He said, St. Martin, always obedient and inspired by his divine teacher, dealt with his brothers with that profound love which comes from pure faith and humility of spirit. He loved men because he honestly looked on them as God's children and as his own brothers and sisters. Such was his humility that he loved them even more than himself and considered them to be better and more righteous than he was. He did not blame others for their shortcomings. Certain that he deserved more severe punishment for his sins than they did, he would overlook their worst offenses. He was tireless in his efforts to reform criminals, and he would sit up all night with the sick to bring them comfort. For the poor, he would provide food, clothing, and medicine. He He did all he could to care for poor farmhands, blacks and mulattoes who were looked down upon as slaves, the dregs of society of their time. Common people responded by calling him Martin the Charitable. And here's the important part. The virtuous example and even the conversation of this saintly man exerted a powerful influence in drawing other men to religion. It is remarkable how even today his influence can still move us toward the things of heaven. See, even in his state of life, given the origin, the beginning that he came from, he was able in his holiness to draw others to Christ. That is servant leadership. When St. Martin de Porres died in 1639 at age 59, thousands of people from Lima, from aristocrats to the street beggars, they came to view his body and pay him their final respects. This humble man who had made himself servant to all, in the end, was highly exalted by all. So in conclusion, in today's reading, Jesus criticized certain religious leaders of his day for hypocrisy, the fact that they failed to practice what they preached. In contrast, Jesus held up a radically different leadership model, servant leadership. He said, "He who is greatest among you shall be your servant." And by his own example, he demonstrated it. Servant leadership is the heart of Christian discipleship. And throughout the history of the church, the best and the greatest princes of the church were those like St. Martin de Porres, who always put the needs of others before their own and led by example. This is the lesson of today's gospel. St. Martin de Porres.
Right.